everyone. It's great to be here at DrupalCon Barcelona, DrupalCon Europe this year. My name is Suzanne Dargacheva. I'm the co-founder of Evolving Web. These are old slides. I was recently a board member of the Drupal Association, and I also love teaching Drupal and sharing what I know. So I've been doing Drupal for many years, worn many hats. As a front-end developer, a site builder. Now I usually work with clients and I'm more on the UX and content strategy side, which is really fun. And so now that's sort of the perspective that I'm bringing. So if you want to stay in touch, you can always email me, suzanne@evolvingweb.ca. I'm also on the Drupal Slack as Pixelite or on Twitter. So feel free to reach out. So what I really want to focus on today when we're talking about building landing pages in Drupal and providing more flexibility with how content looks and really creating this kind of flexible content, I want to focus on a little bit on content editors and the content editor experience. And the reason I think that that's important is that, you know, we build websites for a living. We're kind of technical people, most of us here. But there's lots of people out there who are relying on to make a website successful besides that, right? You have designers who are doing branding, you have content experts who are actually coming up with the content, and marketers who are creating this more catchy content. And we need to also build tools for them. We need to enable them. Otherwise, what we're building is kind of going to fall flat. So if your website is successful when you launch it on day one, that's great, but you also need to build tools for the people who are going to take that and run with it. So that comes down to the question of like, what kind of tools do these content editors want? Like, what do they need to be successful? Like, what are we actually building? So these days when we're looking at new websites, or we're looking at a refresh project and we're looking at what are the designs like, for the past few years, actually, most designs that come across my desk have some elements that look kind of like this. They're kind of like a page that's a combination of things. They're really trying to sell a product or sell an idea. And they're combining content that's more traditional content with more marketing content, more visuals, more videos that play within the content. They tend to be more of a conglomeration of things. And sometimes we call these magazine style pages or landing pages. And they tend to be more flexible. And content editors, they see these designs too, right? And when I see these designs, I might think, oh yeah, I could build that out of some blocks and that would be easy to build. But the content editor might be thinking something else, right? They might be thinking, oh, I could create 100 of these pages. They could all look different. And so we have some assumptions here when we're building, and the editors have assumptions too. So we see this again and again with pages that are really visual and display kind of a combination of content. And you might be expected to build many of these pages that all have kind of variations. So a landing page or a home page might be an example, or kind of a topic page might be another example. But you're going to see these pages, of course, arising. And so then the question is, for these more flexible pages that don't really fall into the category of traditional content, how do we actually put these together? And I make a distinction, and maybe it's just a made up one, but I make a distinction between page building and layout building. And I think of page building as being the idea that you can provide a tool that allows the user to define their own content for a certain set of pages, and they can construct those pages out of different components. And then layout building is more like, well, what's the layout of more standardized content supposed to be? So I'm sure many of you have already tried the layout builder, which is in Drupal 8, Drupal 9 as well. And you've probably tried it, and maybe you've tried it you've tried to use it to create a layout for a standard type of content. Like you say, my articles are always going to look like this. My recipes are always going to look like that. And that's like predefining the layout of those types of pages. But page building is more like, I'm going to choose the layout and the content. I'm going to start from scratch with both, and then come up with an idea for what my page looks like. And of course, this provides a lot more flexibility, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. Okay, so to get into the more specifics of this, so when I think of like creating a layout in using Layout Builder, going in, looking at my content type, I have a recipe content type. What do I want this to look like? I can drag and drop the different elements of that content type around on the page. So I think of this as being layout building. And page building is more like, okay, I'm starting from a blank slate. I'm going to select a set of blocks that are going to appear on this page, and then I'm going to drop the content in. And I'm going to decide what the content is, and I'm also going to decide how those content elements fit together. And there's different tools for the page building part. So if you want somebody to be able to construct this kind of layout with whatever content they want, you have different options. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that you're designing a tool. So you're not just building a set of pages, because Drupal is much more flexible than that. You're actually creating the tool that other people, hopefully you're not the only one adding content to your website, that other people can also use to build pages and create more content. And whatever approach you take, whatever you do, the truth is you are designing a tool. So the decisions you make have to be kind of tailored to that. So I have a couple examples of landing pages that we can look at together, and we can kind of think about how complex these are and what tool we would use for the job. And so at this point, I'm thinking about the flexibility required and how complex the layout is. So I have a little, very, very short video. So don't blink, because you have to watch the video. Whoops, it didn't play. Okay, let's try that again. I would like this to play. There we go. So here we're going to see like scrolling down a page, how complex is this page? We would see like, content appearing in a set of content components, one after the next. And let me try again. Okay, I'm going to move on. So in the landing page I was showing, there was like a banner at the top, and then there might have been another content component underneath that maybe showed a call to action, maybe a set of news items underneath that. And I would call it a simple layout, because each element is kind of self-contained. So there's no two elements sitting next to each other. So the yellow blocks here, these each I would call a content component, and it could be any of these examples I named, like a list. It could be a video, it could be an image, it could be a call to action, it could be a simple button, and it can have its own internal layout. Like for example, if you have a list of blog posts, maybe those blog posts appear in three columns, each next to each other, but that is in itself just one content component that you can move around the page. So that would be like a relatively simple page where you don't actually have to have elements sitting next to each other. And so I would say that this is like a kind of two-dimensional, like you can move things up and down and you can select what things they are. And now I have a more fancy one, and we'll see if this video works. This is for a landing page that has a little bit more going on. So there are more components sitting next to each other. So I'm not going to wait for the video. You can just trust me. So if you go to many landing pages out there that you see designs for, you'll see that there are elements sitting next to each other. So maybe you have a news list sitting next to an events list. That's pretty common. Or maybe you have 3 callouts for different things, or 3 kind of almost advertisements or calls to action sitting next to each other in 3 columns. And so you're mixing and matching components. You're able to move things up and down the page, but you're also able to pick a layout in which you'll place these components. And I would call this more like a 3-dimensional, like a more complex landing page. And so if I just had to be really, if I just had to pick like what's the simplest technology for each one, I might say, well, for the first example, for the 2-dimensional one, I could do this with paragraphs. And so many of you have used paragraphs, one of the most popular modules for Drupal, right? And paragraphs allows you to add different components, and you can drag them up and down because you can change the order. So I can, with paragraphs, add a banner paragraph, a call to action paragraph, and a news listing paragraph. And then I can switch the order as I want on the page. So I get a good amount of flexibility, but paragraphs does not have a good tool for placing things next to each other in a layout. It's not meant for that. It can be engineered to do that, but it's not like what the tool was designed to do. Whereas the layout builder provides a lot more flexibility, and it's designed to handle layouts. And so you can very easily create this type of landing page with also layout complexity and flexibility. But I don't think that that's the only measure that we should use to pick between one and the other. Like, oh, if it's really simple, we can use paragraphs. If it's really complex and, well, really complex, if it has layout aspects to it, let's use Layout Builder. I don't think that that's quite right. And so I want to take a step back and think about things maybe more from the content editor perspective. So last year, or well, earlier this year, I had a chance to do some usability testing of the Layout Builder and of paragraphs. And the purpose of the test was just to see, given a very simple layout, given a very simple landing page, standalone landing page, if we give people the Layout Builder and we give people paragraphs, which one of them is easier for them to use? Which one of them do they like more? Just like, how do they respond? What are their impressions? And we gave these to content editors. Now, the content editors did already know Drupal, but they didn't know these tools. And they already had some experience like working with content. So they had a little bit of background. These weren't brand new users. And the other kind of caveat is that we also did some configuration in advance. We didn't just give people Drupal out of the box and say, build a landing page. We did configure the Layout Builder. We configured paragraphs. And what we did is we set up, for Layout Builder, we set up some block types. For paragraphs, we set up some paragraph types, just to allow the user to create some simple components on the page so that they could actually do the task without doing configuration. All they had to do was add content. So we had kind of a process. We took this seriously. We recruited some users. Our use cases were just page building. So we didn't do the whole like layout building part. We did create a whole script so that users would know exactly what to do. And we recorded the results and did a bit of a write-up. And I can share that with you at the end, like a more detailed analysis of what all these users were thinking and feeling. And so the study, I mean, we were trying to get them to build a page that looked like this. So if you're looking at the screen now, you see there's like a big banner at the top with a call to action button and some text, and these things are in different columns. And so, you know, you could interpret this as having a layout because there's an image on one side and text on the other, or you could interpret it as having just one piece of content after the other. So either approach would work in this case. So when we showed people the layout builder, the first impressions, well, people were a little bit intimidated at first. And part of the reason is that we customized the interface to add some block types so that they could build the pieces of the page, but we didn't customize the layout builder to like remove options or simplify it, because we just wanted to see how people would interact with it. And people were overwhelmed by the amount of options that they have, just the quantity of links when you go to create content. And people were also, not surprisingly, confused by the labeling, like add section, add block, these kind of terminology. You know, even if you know Drupal and you know what a block is, you don't necessarily associate adding a block with putting a piece of content into a layout. So it was a little bit confusing at first, just the terminology. And I would say that this is a terminology that speaks more to site builders than to content editors. So the language of content editors, if you use a tool like, you know, WordPress or Craft CMS or like these types of platforms, they talk more about adding content and they use more content authoring terms. So yeah, the first question, where do I create content? But pretty soon, you know, you click the options and you figure it out. These content editors were able to do the task, and they were able to go in and add a block and figure out what to put on the page based on the content, the block types that we gave them. Editing the page was again a little bit of a challenge because again the terminology is more for site builders. So using the link configure to edit a block was not necessarily intuitive. And then we compared it to paragraphs. So with the layout builder, users did have to click many times really to just place one block on the page. So if your job is a content editor and you're fast, because some content editors are fast, they want to just get the content in as soon as possible. And Layout Builder did require a bunch of clicks. Whereas paragraphs, although you do have to add the paragraphs, once you've added them, you just have this huge form and everything's there. All the fields are there. You see everything at once and you can put everything in. So a big form might be intimidating, but again, content editors who are used to using Drupal and building complex content, they're willing to use a form that's long, and so they did find this interface like faster to use, I would say. That being said, a lot of them pointed out that for a very long page, and some landing pages are incredibly long, probably too long, that the paragraphs option would make it harder to locate what you're trying to edit. It was a bit disorienting. Definitely for people who aren't familiar with it, it's going to be a bit of a learning curve. And then we couldn't help ourselves. We had to also compare the other two options in Drupal to Gutenberg, because everyone's talking about Gutenberg, like why doesn't Drupal just have Gutenberg? And so we wanted to see how this would line up. So given the same, you know, the same task, go and build this landing page, how did people find the Gutenberg interface? And what we found is that people really liked it at first. So the first impression was very positive. I think it's more welcoming. It's immediately speaking to content editors. It's speaking the language. Right away, you see the components that you want to add, and there's even instructions right there, like add title, write something. It's pretty friendly. But that said, as soon as some complexity was added, like, oh, now we want to make this text that we added into a title, or let's change the styling a little bit, or let's even move things up and down on the page. These types of tasks, just like modifying what you're writing. Because the interface tries to be so simple, it hides some of these features. And it's like, it's like the classic Apple approach of like, let's just have one button. And then that one button is supposed to do everything. The interface really relies on this simplicity. So we found that it was great for first impressions, great for like inviting the user to add content, but actually not that intuitive for more kind of complexity or necessarily figuring out what all the options are, because everything wasn't really just apparent. And then really content editors do understand the importance of standardization, and they were asking, what does this do? Does this create HTML? And they were concerned as well about the fact that this doesn't seem as much like structured content as the Drupal tools. And so on a more technical note, I would say that Gutenberg feels like a similar interface of page building, it doesn't give you the same results of having structured content that then you can use really like in a Drupal way. And I would say Layout Builder, allowing you to create these content blocks, probably does the best job of that. Paragraphs also gives you some flexibility, although there's a bit of an annoyance of the relationship between paragraphs and your nodes, other content. But Gutenberg certainly doesn't give you the same amount of control over your content. Oh, and then the last note about Gutenberg is it does look great on the back end, but when you publish your content, it doesn't actually look the same as in the editor. And authors did find this confusing. The other two interfaces, like paragraphs, nobody expects that the front end of the site is going to look like this. You know that you're on an editing page. And so that was sort of a bit of a letdown with Gutenberg, that the front end didn't look the same as the back end. So a few just general takeaways, I would say, keep in mind the content editor perspective. You want to think about the content editor workflow, like how do authors create content on your website? Like, is it that they're actually authoring the content in Drupal, or are they copying, pasting from somewhere else? How do they decide what layout to use? Are there instructions? Getting a sense of that workflow can help you pick a better tool. Editors like layout-oriented editing, like they do like the layout builder. They like the idea that they can drag and drop things around the page and pick a layout, but they don't want limitless options. The most options is not necessarily the best things. So you'll notice now when you use Layout Builder, maybe you'll notice because I'm telling you, but there are really great modules that will restrict the options, and I would suggest using them because the extra flexibility is actually just like with permissions. If you give somebody all the permissions, it's harder to use. Same thing with the Layout Builder. The Layout Builder is more complex because it's more flexible. So content editors get that. They're willing to learn if they can get more out of a tool. And paragraphs is really quite similar to standard content editing. So there's going to be less of a learning curve there if you have people who already know Drupal. If people don't know Drupal, I think you won't get so much out of that. So if you are building a website and you're picking one of these options, just some general guidelines, like don't add too many block and paragraph types. I have seen websites now that have 42 paragraph types, and I think that's too many. I think it's safe to say, kind of like with content types, an overload of options, maybe it means that there's something wrong with the logic. So try to limit that. Having a lot of duplicated content is not good either. Like, it's easy when you start to create landing pages to just duplicate the same little content components all over the place. It's a great idea to start using reference fields and to structure your content well. This is still important, even though you're creating a flexible content model. And with that said, I would also encourage you to continue to use content types that are more standardized and structured for a content that permits that. So if you have 1,000 products on your site, I don't recommend using this kind of flexible page building model for all of those. Try to keep your content consistent. The number of options you give for editors. So if you're using Layout Builder, there are 3 modules I recommend using. There's Layout Builder restrictions, there's the Layout Builder UX module, and you can also try Layout Builder modal. And I know there's new modules every day, it seems, for Layout Builder, so check out the list on Drupal.org. And you can also try to avoid using site builder terminology. And this is hard because there's already a lot of terminology just built into the interface. But recognize that that's there. Try to have more user-friendly terminology for your names of things like block types or paragraph types, and just recognize that words like configure are not friendly. And finally, content editors love the media library. So definitely when you're demoing this to them, show them that, use that tool. Like, they love being able to reuse media in general. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you which one to pick, which option to pick. Should you use Layout Builder for your new website, or should you use paragraphs? I think that both options maybe still have a place. Personally, I love the idea of using Layout Builder because it's the new tool. It's obviously, built into Drupal. It's got all this flexibility, so you can do everything with it, but you can also restrict. So it seems just like if I had to pick one, like, I would go with Layout Builder. But that being said, there are many reasons to use paragraphs. It is going to be faster for people to add content, especially if they know Drupal and they just boom, 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 want to get some content in, and there's no layout, no elements side by side. There's no reason not to continue using paragraphs for many use cases. I would say the pros, like it can give you less flexibility, right? Because you're not introducing this extra layout variable into your pages, and that can often be really good. It's not designed, though, to manage layouts. So if you are trying to manage layouts with paragraphs, I would tell you maybe this is the time to switch to Layout Builder. And it can make it hard using paragraphs to visualize the end product. With the Layout Builder, you are going to see a little bit more what your content is going to look like in the back end, and that can really help, especially for content editors who are more visual thinkers, and that tends to be a lot of us. So I would say it would provide like a more pleasing user experience overall once you learn the tool. And then I would also keep in mind some really important details. So everything I've been talking about today is like what Drupal 10 years ago or 20 years ago was not really designed for. So the paragraphs in Layout Builder, like the way that I'm talking about using these tools for page building, this is not really like structured content types. And so that means that if you just blindly start making really flexible landing pages, you might be throwing away a lot of the benefits that you get from structured content. So things like accessibility and SEO are really important for these types of pages, and if not more important, because these are maybe the most engaging pages of your website. So it's really important to maintain a semantic and structured content as much as possible. So that means for these types of pages, make sure that you have metadata, that you have the fields to map to the metadata that you need for the page. Make sure that the page has a title that you can actually use as an H1. Make sure that every page, has a description that's going to show up in your Google searches, right? And make sure that the ordering of headings is actually logical and that the markup really aligns to what the content is. So that's key for both your accessibility practice and good SEO. And then the other main caveat that I would just point out is that if like many of us, you have websites now that are built using paragraphs. Going out and switching to Layout Builder tomorrow, it requires a lot of work, especially if you have many, many landing pages already. So I suggest doing a proper analysis of this, actually look at what you have, think about the work to retrain people and migrate everything over. Migrating to Layout Builder is still a hard problem. So we're doing this now with some projects, Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, adopting Layout Builder and doing migration work. And that's tricky work. So take that into account when you're making your choice. It's not just about the ideal tool, it's about how you get there and how you adapt the people and the content and everything. And finally, there's lots of great resources out there. So I have on the Evolving Web blog, there is this kind of overview of what I've talked about today. There's also some results of that usability study we did. And then lots of great modules that I recommend trying out for Layout Builder. And lastly here, Georgia Tech is a university in the States, and they're using Layout Builder, and they have great documentation for their editors. And I just recommend checking it out as like a great example of what you can use to explain to your content editors how Layout Builder works and all the choices available. I think they did a great job, so I like linking to them and giving them a bit of a shout out. And finally, there's lots of stuff to learn about Drupal. So if you're new to Drupal, I do run a training program as part of Evolving Web. If you're curious about that, you can find out more evolvingweb.ca/training. And we have lots of kind of blended learning coming up in the new year. So online, but keeping it fun. It's not like 6 hours on Zoom. So check that out. And now I hope we have time for questions, and I hope you have questions or comments or your own opinions. So I'm just going to stop sharing, which hopefully is okay that I stop sharing. And I'm going to go over to the questions on the platform. Oops.
Hi, and thank you very much, Suzanne. Great talk there. So we've got a few questions, which generally about Layout Builder rather than paragraphs. There's several people pointing towards the link module, layout paragraphs. Would you care to comment on that, or have you not experienced that?
Oh, yes. So that's a great module. I have tried it out, although we have not yet used it on a project. And I think it just speaks to the fact that people love paragraphs, they're using it, and then they want the flexibility of Layout Builder. So I think, so this makes your choice even harder. You get a module that fills in the gap between the two. I do think that using Layout Builder makes sense because it's in core and it's just, but I can understand why people are using modules like this, because at first Layout Builder does seem really hard to use. And if, like I mentioned with the cost of changing ownership, like if you can simply drop in a module rather than switch all the content over to a new content structure, that's definitely that's the choice I would take.
Thank you. So Katerina is asking, what should be the criteria to select the available tools in WYSIWYG, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think if you're starting from scratch, like if you're building a new set of pages and you don't have that concern, I would look at the design itself and what types of options you want to provide. So the first thing I would look at would be the little assessment I tried to do showing the videos that didn't work. I would look at the complexity of the landing pages themselves. So is there actually a layout component to what you're trying to build? Are there two components that sit next to each other in a 2-column or a 3-column layout. And if not, then you could simply use paragraphs, and that might be a more easy option for your team because maybe you've used paragraphs before and you don't anticipate having this added complexity. So I would say in that case, if you've used paragraphs before, the layout's really simple, and then I would go with that tool. You know, it's probably going to be easier for you to adopt it. But if you anticipate that you might have, you know, you might want more flexibility now or down the road, then I would go with Layout Builder because it's going to give you all those options.
Which kind of nicely segues into Tim's question. Do you use Layout Builder and paragraphs together on one site, or just choose one or the other?
Of course you could do that. Yeah. So people also use paragraphs for other things than just building landing pages. So I'll give you an example. So I'm working on a project right now where there's already a ton of content that exists. It's like 900 websites, let alone 900 pages, right? And there's all this content called statistics, I think. So like, you've seen these things before. They try to look like infographics, but on a web page. And it's like, oh, we have 10,000 students and we have 800 buildings. And like, there's these graphics and they have like a big text and a little text. So each of those, you know, if I was trying, and the site we're rebuilding it, we're using Layout Builder. So there is a temptation to say, oh, well, let's have a block type called statistics. And then each one of those individual metrics could be a paragraph. So we could have paragraphs within blocks within our Layout Builder. And I think that like maybe structurally, like that's what paragraphs is kind of for. Like it's like field, almost like a old fashioned, we would have used field collections, right? But I think at some point you're making your content too complex, and maybe you could just have 6 fields, like one for each of like, okay, you can have 3 metrics and each one can have the big text and the little text, and let's just call it 6 fields and keep it really simple. Yeah. So I would say like, if you're tempted to use paragraphs and Layout Builder together in this way of like nested content within content, you might be over engineering your content a little bit. So take a step back and think about it. And there might be other options that are more robust, like having a special field type or something that could simplify your content model. Because paragraphs, they are another kind of entity, like you're adding a lot to your database if you start to use paragraphs within other things.
I think maybe the next question I'll go with is Leslie's. Are there differences between the two in terms of content moderation and revisioning? And also maybe there's another question which is about translations and languages. So, you know, when the content gets a bit more complicated.
Yeah, this is such a great question. So the answer is, you know, like, yes, they can handle revisions, and yes, they do support multiple languages, but especially with the languages, as soon as it gets complicated, you know, the options are more limited. So in both cases, you have limitations on how you can do translation. And so we've found that, well, I'm in Quebec, so content always, well, not always, but most often has to be in English and French. And most organizations decide, okay, we're going to create content in English and then translate it to French, or the other way around. So most organizations have like a language preference, and that workflow is going one way or the other. And so that's a relief, because that's sort of what you have to do with these types of pages. Like, you build in one language, you do your translation, and then if you want to make updates to the page, that you would do it in the original language first. And that kind of workflow does make it a little easier. Because with paragraphs, for example, you have to if you wanted to add a new paragraph to the page or delete a paragraph, you'd do that in the original language first, and then you would update the translation. For Layout Builder, so Layout Builder does allow you to have like translated pages, and that you can translate the content on the pages, and you can translate the, well, of course, any content that's dynamic is going to appear in the correct language if you have all your filtering and everything set up. But you can't have as much flexibility, like, oh, I want my French page to be different in these ways, and I want to structure it differently. Like, you don't have as many options in that case. Like, I want my French page to order the content differently or something. So I'd say you're limited in your options, and you have to keep that in mind when you're kind of making promises to the content editors.
So I think we'll draw it to a close. Probably maybe one more with Ashley's question. Do you think it's better to design for those who are used to the current, possibly painful experience, or design for new users who aren't used to seeing it?
That's a really great question. I would say I would design for I would design for the new users.
Yeah.
If I had to pick, because the users, well, that being said, then you leave time for the onboarding. Like, you have to get people excited about it. And so maybe that means that you actually ask them. Like, you can do user testing and people love it that you're asking their opinion. So, maybe just try to design for the new users, but don't forget about the users who have their tool and like they like how things work. Try to give them some chance to give input, and also consider that they might have really important input about how you design the new thing, like what paragraphs or what block types are needed, right? Let's ask those users, because they are the ones that deal with the content. Then they're going to feel like they have a say, and that's going to be helpful in getting them on board.
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left and 3 questions. I'll just I'll let you choose which one you want to do.
Okay, well, I like the first one. How would you educate users to not put everything into one WYSIWYG body? Yeah, people who are used to WYSIWYG, they might just want to keep using that forever. I would show them how much better their content can look, how much more consistent, and I would make some documentation to show real examples from your site. So I have like a really simple Google Drive, even for my own like evolvingweb.ca, like I have that for myself, just to see like what are all the options and what do they look like. So that would be my advice there. And then the second one about SEO, I really like this question, that paragraphs is giving you trouble. I think that you should have the flexibility to do whatever you want with your SEO with paragraphs, because you have templates for everything. You're going to have templates for your fields, and you maybe can't rely on SEO modules because you don't have, maybe what you're talking about is the fact that if you're using paragraphs and you can put anything on the page, then you don't have a consistent field for like the title of the page, the summary of the page, or the, what image is supposed to show up on your LinkedIn post, right? So you may have to add some dedicated fields just for that outside of your paragraphs.
Yeah, I think that's it. Meta tag module is definitely worth looking at if that's what you're into. I think we've only got a few seconds left, so I'll say thank you very much, Suzanne. Great talk, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. Bye.